Before getting stuck into the Zapped to the Past podcast, please accept our apologies. The audio quality on this episode only is a little bit lacking, and that's because the microphone was damaged when we recorded it. We've done our best to clean up the audio, and we hope it doesn't mar your enjoyment, but it won't happen again. Also, sometimes we refer to an episode 0. What is episode 0? That was the pilot episode of the podcast. That's something that we talk about in these episodes, but has yet to be released, and we intend to release that episode in the future. Until then, enjoy episode 1 part 2 of Zapped to the Past.
Hello and welcome back to Zapped to the Past and our coverage of the games that were reviewed in issue 1 of Zap 64. I am your host Adrian Mills and I am joined by my good friend and C64 stalwart Graham Raddings. Last week we looked at our first batch of games from this issue and were impressed with Cauldron, bemused by Super Huey and turned off by Turner Nog. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, then I suggest you go and do so. If you have, then let's get on with things. Graham, tell us what we have to look forward to in this episode.
In this episode, we give our regards to Broad Street, we spend some time with the Lords of Midnight, we look at Penetrator, Shades, Web Dimensions, and spend some time with Buck Rogers.
Awesome. So, let's get on with the games. Okay, so our next game is Give My Regards to Broad Street. I don't know much about Give My Regards to Broad Street. It is, as far as I'm aware, an album and a film released by Paul McCartney and probably Wings. This is the 1980s. And for some reason, it was made into a game. A not very good game is the least kind thing I can say about it. It's the most kind thing, I can say about it. It's essentially some kind of top-down drive crappily around London simulator looking for tube stations. And that randomly people's faces will appear at the bottom of the screen with an arrow and a tube station that you have to get to that you've no idea where they are because this is not London. There are so it's just some representation of it. The car is controlled incredibly badly. This is like some It's like a terrible, proto GTA, where pavements are as high as walls because if you hit them, you stop dead. And the way it controls is that you don't hold the joystick left or right to turn right. You have to keep tapping it left or right to turn incrementally in each way, and it's just bewildering garbage that I just couldn't get my head around because I kept going to tube stations and then what I could only assume was Paul McCartney would get out of a car, walk back and forth outside it until you pressed the fire button because there was no one there and you'd gone to the wrong place, and then he would get back in and off you'd go driving again. And parts of the map were just a long straight road that led to a dead end for no reason. And you could see that there was a bit more road below it. So why hadn't they just joined it up? What kind of game was this where it would make I just couldn't understand. I was like, when someone was designing this map and they went, oh, you see that bit there's a dead end. Are you putting anything down there? No. Why not? Why would I? Well, maybe join it up with that other bit of road. No. Why would you not? I don't get it. I can't, in my head, I'm like, it's broken from fundamentally on every level sort of thing of from controls to actually communicating what you've got to do. And the loop of the tube. Oh my God. It drove me mad. this loop of what Wing song was it? Band on the Run. God, Jesus Christ! This game made me made me angry.
It's a game that has problems, right? And it's obvious why. Now, there's a few things to note. So, firstly, apparently this is map accurate to London. So that's the first thing to note. Apparently, the second thing to note is that the idea of the game is that you drive to those places, collect more parts of the song, and that the song that you listen to in the background actually starts to elongate. So instead of just hearing repeatedly, endlessly, band on the run, band on the run, band on the run, that bit, eventually you start to build up the bigger picture. So that's the plan. But what they wrapped that with was the most inexplicably difficult to control car in the whole time of car games. So all I managed to do was rotate the car fast in one direction. So just like a real car, if you want to turn left, you just go right until you're facing left. So it was impossible to control. I was trying to navigate a map, which, yes, it's London, I think. And even if it isn't London or it's some kind of approximation, it was still stupidly difficult to navigate. Like you say, inexplicable choices of, dead ends. And, an assumption that, the tube stations are something that everyone knows where they are. So this didn't... I'm not sure what the premise of the Give My Regards to Broad Street movie is, other than it's a nod and a wink to Paul McCartney's musical talent. Other than that, I don't know what it's... And it wasn't something I engaged with when it came out, because I just remember thinking, this is going to be rubbish. And I seem to remember that back then, of course, all film reviews were done by Barry Norman and Film 85. And I remember him saying it was rubbish. So that just put me off, thinking, I'm never going to watch this film anyway. This tie-in is inexplicable. The idea, actually, of there being a Paul McCartney-based video game is really, really weird. This is when licensing in games was just so random that I imagine there was a scramble because it was Paul McCartney, because it was, Wings related, and they were popular in the 80s. And let's not underestimate the impact of Paul McCartney in the 80s. He was huge. He had that massive album with the Pipes of Peace around that time. He was doing duets with Michael Jackson, and he was appearing, with Linda and all this other stuff. Like Linda, like I know her, like Linda, me mate, Linda McCartney.
I don't know her anymore.
But he was a huge. And he released what is affectionately known in our house as Mulligan's Tires.
Did that bloody frog song?
Mulligan's Tire. He did the frog chorus, of course, for that Rupert thing. Anyway, long and the short of this whole diatribe is that this game was crap, and it was a rubbish film. And it was uncontrollable, and it made me want to find the song of Band on the Run and smash it to pieces, because it was awful. There's no redeemable qualities about this game, and I believe the Zap review reflects that as well by saying the same thing. In there somewhere is an idea, but somewhere along the line someone said, just put Band on the Run in the background and have someone driving around London. There you go. And they never really thought about any more of that, comparably to something like Ghostbusters, where it's the only other game I can think of off the top of my head at that time where you were driving around a city doing stuff. If you can't achieve that, that basic level with Ghostbusters, which was released before this, then don't bother trying, because if you're not going to add that kind of layers of complexity and control to it, and you're just going to end up with just torturing people with an awful Paul McCartney chip version, don't waste your time, and certainly don't waste my time with it. I hated it from the second it started to the pleasing moment I switched the damn thing off. Awful.
And you can make good games around these kind of weird concepts, because I will always, and we'll come to, I've done it, I think it is actually reviewed, Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah, concept games can be done, right?
Yeah, this is more of just a concept of shit.
And I have this in my imaginary place, and I'm not going to go to a text-based
drive round London, turn right, just to say that. 45 degrees, turn right.
Pick up music, add music
45
to...
degrees.
No. Well, in my place, I imagine that at some stage during this game's development, Paul McCartney was presented with this. And I imagine him just giving that kind of Paul McCartney look and going, it's all right. Not knowing anything about it.
Was that?
And please don't. I don't know how Paul.
Not like
I don't know
that.
how Paul McCartney speaks. I'm assuming Liverpudlian. That isn't the best Liverpudlian. Apologies to anyone from Liverpool who listens to that. My point being, I am reasonably sure that Paul McCartney must have given this the green light at some point, but he must have been, drunk or something when he did. Or completely befuddled by computer games and just looked at it and go, wow, computers, aren't they magic? And then that was even worse.
Let's move on before bad things happen. Before bad things happen.
Let's move on quickly before
Absolutely,
before McCartney steps in.
You might summon him. You McCartney 3 times into a mirror.
Exactly. He'd just come in and go, stop. I'm not even going to say it. Stop me doing Paul McCartney impersonations immediately.
Give my regards to Broad Street. No,
move on quickly.
Just bad. Avoid.
No, don't give your regards to Broad Street. Avoid Broad Street completely.
Green.
Go to Oxford Street. It's far more shops.
Ironically, sort of thing, none of the streets in this are broad. They're all very narrow.
Yeah, give my regard to the narrowest, difficult to navigate streets ever in a car that can only go one direction.
Right, okay. Yeah. Interesting game, Pastfinder. I quite enjoyed my time with Pastfinder. It's a really odd game. I'm going to try and describe it. It starts off with some kind of weird sort of map screen where you pick a direction to move on a character by character basis. You can move left, diagonal, the compass points, but also north by northeast, things like that, northeast. And you press which way you want to go, and you kind of move into that section, and then it becomes this strange vertical scrolling, part shoot 'em up, part dodge 'em up thing where you control this strange spider thing, and you control how fast and you move up and down and left and right. And you have to hop over obstacles, you have to shoot some things, and you can equip some strange radiation things, and it's all about moving through these areas of radiation and trying to deliver something. I found it unusual and quite an interesting concept. I like the main, it's really abstract. And what I took away from this, I did enjoy my time with it, was just that, if I'm going to say, I don't know if you found this sort of thing, but this was a huge influence on Alicat, the Braybrook game. Because
completely.
This at times looked just like Alicat.
Completely.
With the similar sort of, with the vertical scrolling, the weird sort of structures which you could go under, you could fly over, you could shoot, the objects, the things coming down towards you. I know Alicat was a racing game, sort of thing, going around that loop, but visually and the way that it was presented, incredibly similar to this. But there was enough weirdness here to hook me into thinking I could get on with this. This was all right, and it was very, very strange and quite had its own, like we said about Cauldron before, it had its own sense of place and world and its own sense of style and thing to it that was unusual enough to drag me in and make me think, this is actually quite an open game. Controls were not perfect, and quite often I didn't make jumps that I thought I could have done, and end up dying. But on the whole, I like the fact you sped up as you went left and right. Bit of inertia there and things like that. It's all right. I quite enjoyed this, and this was a game I'd never ever played before. I had no recollection of this, no experience of it, and I came away from this quite enjoying my time with it.
Yes, I agree. I mean, it was an arcade-inspired kind of take on a game, so there was that kind of arcade pace. I quite liked that about it. It had some really weird mechanics, and not just, I say weird, but they were just like the jumping thing, and they were challenging, but it made it different, and I quite liked that about it. I liked the fact that it was, it had something different. Yeah, some of the sprite graphics, some of the graphics were it felt a little bit shoot 'em up construction kit. We'll come to that much later down the line, but it had that kind of feel about it. But at the same time, it was very playable. It was fun. It had some perfunctory arcade kind of sounds in it. So it was clearly, it was like someone was trying to make an arcade game that didn't exist, and therefore they made an arcade game. No, so this wasn't a conversion. This was for me, this felt like somebody had just made a C64 arcade game in their own way. And like you say, it had its own game world, and game logic, and because of that, it kind of worked. And it was kind of, it did have the challenges with the radiation and the zones and the things. and you had a lot to think about when you're playing the game, and that's no bad thing. And it kept the controls to a joystick, which so we weren't typing in 3 keyboard commands. We weren't trying to. This was a straightforward. The things in front of you, shoot them or move out the way or jump, whatever. No, the logic of the game made playing it more fun, and because it felt more fun. It had that, and because it had that arcade-inspired feel, it felt like you wanted to keep at it, which is kind of key. So it wasn't a game I'd ever come across before. I have to say the same as you. This was purely a find based on Zapped the Past, and the whole idea of looking at these games in Zap, and Zap had reviewed it and given it a fairly favourable review. So I did the same, and in actuality, it's got the kind of. But you're right. This was a heavy inspiration for the Braybrook game that came later. There's no doubt about that. Alley Cat and this are linked. There's no doubt. Which made me wonder when I played Pathfinder whether there was an arcade that it was based on, but I couldn't find one doing my search, and it certainly wasn't mentioned in terms of the Zap review. So my take was that this was kind of a unique. Someone had played a lot of games, and those games had inspired this game. And there was an arc and a playability about it, and as we'll discover later, these sort of shooter games that came on the C64, as they start to evolve, they get better and better at this kind of stuff, and adding these kind of mechanics in and things start to become much better, and then we start to get really slick titles later down the line, as we'll discover. But this was I thought it was a really good arcade-inspired shoot 'em up, and certainly a lot better than a lot of the other fodder that was out there. It wasn't trying to do anything. It wasn't copying anything. That's what my main note. This wasn't another shoot 'em up game that I've played a million times. There was something about this that was a bit different, and I like that. The jumping thing, for example, good.
Yeah, nice animation on the main craft, like some sort of weird spider-like creature. And I think this played to its strengths as well, because like you're saying, it does feel arcadey, but also as well it adds enough strategy in there for it being like a computer game to a home game. So it's like, this feels arcadey, but you're never going to get this using these different items, plotting your way through this map in an arcade game. It would be much more linear. With this, it allowed you sense of freedom, and the different zones you went through, different visual styles, colorings and everything, and it played to this felt like it'd been I think that's a really good point. It feels like an arcade game designed from the ground up for a computer system, for adding in things that will benefit you because you can keep coming back to it and learn the world and the mechanics. This was a pleasant surprise in amongst the dross this week.
I agree.
So Pathfinder, thumbs up.
Yeah, definite thumbs up from me.
Thumbs up. Cool. We like Pastfinder. Good stuff. Well done. Activision as well, wasn't it?
Yes. They were having a sea of releases. Not all of them great, as we'll come to. But when they hit but they were kind of just releasing everything at this point now. So, as we'll discover, some things were a hit and some things were not. So.
Okay, so our last title for this section. And I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are, because I think you said you'd never actually played this. Another seminal title, probably not far below something like Elite, and that is Lords of Midnight. Mike Singleton, if I'm remembering correctly, Mike Singleton creating 32,000 different views of the same thing, almost, in 48K, 64K. As you play the titular Lords, are you the Lords of Midnight? I can never quite tell, sort of thing. Basically, the game starts off. It's a think Myst, an early version of Myst. So static screen adventure type thing, where you have a view in front of you of a landscape, and it tells you that. You play 4 different characters, Luxor, Corleth, or whatever. There's 4 of them anyway. And you go through a day in the life of each of them, exploring this strange world, feeling invigorated a lot of the time. I noticed I was feeling invigorated a lot, and then going to sleep, and then the Lords of Darkness, whatever sort of thing, go on the prowl during the night, and then you repeat. You can face different directions. You can turn around. There's a whole environment to explore and move around, and that kind of exists. and is impressive from a technical point of view. Again, I think it's one of those games that is a technical marvel, and I give it all its due props for that. But I'm a huge, always my whole life been a huge fan of fantasy literature. Your Lord of the Rings, your Shannara's, your Dragonlance, your David Gemmell's, all the big hitter sort of thing, especially during the 80s. I love this sort of thing. This game seems almost ready-made for me, sort of thing. I kind of like slow strategy games and some of those sort of things, but it always left me very cold, and it just didn't. I think there was just something about it that just didn't engage me, and I just always just could never really sort of get on with it to a point where I wanted to persevere. I don't know, how did you find it, seeing as you've never played it before?
Yeah, I found it the same. The problem I initially felt was okay, I got the idea of the game had scope, the game had ambition, and I don't doubt that there's a whole, that it felt like this, if you were going to make Skyrim and you were going to make it 8-bit, you would probably do it that way. And it did feel like that. It felt bigger, but my view of that world felt really small and very repetitive. And as much as there's text-based descriptions of things, the graphics were so rudimentary and so nondescript in actuality that it just felt like I was just continuously doing the same thing over and over again with very little payoff. Now, these games, again, they require a perseverance. They're of their time. So, I have to detach the idea of, of the Skyrims and the games of all those modern games that take, what that game was trying to do and make it into a 3D believable world. So, taking all of that aside, I admire the scope and the ambition that this game had. I just couldn't get into it, and that's, I think, I'm not a fan of this kind of game. It just felt like it was some kind of role fantasy based game. Somewhere along the line it probably got really interesting, I don't doubt, but for someone that wants to sit there in front of their Commodore 64 for 6 hours and negotiate whatever deals and terrain and things that you had to negotiate with that game, I didn't give it probably enough time. But that said, I'm pretty sure there's an amazing game in there. I don't doubt that, but I just found it something that I couldn't connect with, and I never was a Lords of Midnight fan, even though I've heard of it. I'd heard of the Revelry. I've heard that it's got this big reputation, and there's a number of games that fall into that for me. There's Lords of Midnight's one of them. Elite was another one. Bard's Tale is another one. There's a few games that fall into this kind of. These games are amazing. They're so big and they're so vast and there's so much to do, and the idea of doing that in games exhausts me before I've even switched them on. So I think if it's got that much to do, it's maybe not for me. I like quite niche. Blow it up, find the thing, do the stuff quick. I don't know, I have to work hard and have long conversations in games, but there is a space for that kind of game. Just and this is 64K we're talking about, right? So this Lords of Midnight game is massive in terms of its world scope, and in that respect, this is a tiny amount. Remember, this is less than a Word document for most people. This is less than most people's ringtones they put on their phones. So in that small amount of space, you've got an enormous world and game logic and everything else, and so I admire that. But it's just a board game made into a Commodore 64 game for me, and not a board game I would have ever engaged with. In the same way I didn't engage with some games that Games Workshop produced around that time as well, where there was just these endless rules and endless encounters. I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think for me, it's always been admirable, really, rather than enjoyable.
Yes. If you like that kind of thing, you probably dig it, but not for me.
Yeah, not for me either. No. So it's I'm not going to be as down on it as probably I was with Elite sort of thing, but it is, it's just. I think it's you really need to apply yourself and persevere, and I don't want enough a hook there for me. I don't think it needs a bit more story, something to hook me in. Something just needs. Anyway, but not terrible. So anyway, okay. So we had some good ones there, maybe. Cauldron,
Yes, there is.
Pastfinder?
Cauldron's good. Pastfinder was good. You know, there's moments in there of levity in May 1985, and then it was quickly subsumed by the moment you loaded in Tim doesn't love cricket. Or if you were going to give your regards to Broad Street, very shortly afterwards you were going to give it a big 2 fingers, let me tell you.
Yeah. So I think that ends our part 2. We've got next up. We're going to look at what was going on in the media in '85, films, music. Let's see what was going on and anything interesting that may have been going on TV. And then we're going to come back with some more games. And these are the games that, if you thought the ones we've talked about already were bad or we didn't like them, we've got the ones that actually Zapped thought were bad at the time. So, our roundup of the dross at the bottom of the barrel is still to come. All right, welcome back. So now we are covering what we're doing out of the media. May 1985, we're going to look at some songs, albums, films, TV. What was going on? What was going on? Well, one of the big things that happened on the 13th of May was Dire Straits' album, Brother in Arms, was released. Big album. It became the first compact disc to sell over 1 million copies. There you go. I want my MTV.
That was a good album. Well, of course, I was going to say it had money for nothing on it, right?
Song built for
huge single. First, it was the song that opened MTV in Europe. Or MTV,
quite possibly, yeah. I was never aware something. MTV started about 1981 in the States. Something like that.
It was ongoing.
We were late.
And of course, the song also features Sting.
It does, and I'm not going to do my impression of him. Because it's not worth it. No, I don't want to lose any listeners we may already have. But yeah, so it sold 1 million copies, which is a lot, isn't it? First compacted disc. So it's obviously started the switch from the warmth of vinyl to the coldness of digital.
Yeah, to the technological cold.
That's what it was.
Of laser. Lasers can play things.
I don't know what.
Do you remember the myths? Do you remember the myths of compact disc? It can't be scratched. It lasts forever. Lies. These things do get scratched. They do jump about, and they don't last forever. It was all a lie.
That is true. In the charts, in the singles, it's pretty much dominated by one song, which was Paul Hardcastle's 19, and it was number one pretty much all month. Pretty much number one pretty much all month. So that was good. If you like that kind of comment on Vietnam.
If you like I was going to say, if you like your Vietnam-based sample core,
it's a happy month, isn't it? Let's face it.
It's a bit bleak.
It really is. But there's some other songs that were charting this month. Duran Duran's "View to a Kill," which I'm a big fan of. I do like that.
Yeah, I like Duran Duran.
I've come around to Duran Duran a bit more in the last few years. I like them quite a bit.
Don't listen to the last album.
The only song ever, and it's the popular one by Marillion that I ever even gave any time to, was Kaylee. Good old Fish. But Marillion.
It's that initial, the initial phrase in the music is quite catchy, isn't it? It's got a good catch.
Yeah, it's all right.
But name 5 of the Marillion songs.
I don't know any. I couldn't even tell you their albums. All I remember the album sort of thing is that there was some kid in a sort of drummer outfit on one of the covers of one of the albums, I think. I
just remember that they had a singer called Fish. And I'm thinking, that's an unusual name.
He went off on his own, didn't he? Fish alone.
Yeah, well, he did, he went to live in...
Solo
and
Soulfish.
Well, he went to live in the tropical climate, didn't he? In Jamaica, became tropical fish. I was building up to that, but I couldn't think of anywhere tropical. I was thinking, does he drink Lil? Can I say Lil? Because I was thinking, it's just awful.
Right, so
I wasn't a fan of Marillion at all. And actually, I do know a person who really liked Marillion, but he also liked to pow, and that's as much as I'm ever going to say about that.
Let's move on. Let's
move on to Jimmy Nail.
Jimmy Nail released "Love Don't Live Here Anymore."
On what planet and what world do we live where...
Don't know.
And I'm going to be frank, because I know I'm not saying I'm an ugly person, I'm not saying I'm a good-looking person, but Jimmy Nail is an ugly guy.
He's hit the branches on the way down, hasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So for him, with his broken-nosed, Geordie tones, to sing "Love Don't Live Here Anymore," which isn't his song. He's covering that. But he had a number of number ones, as I remember. There was that one. There was a Crocodile Shoes or whatever. There was,
that song.
I try not to think about it too often, but I only remember him from being Yozza in
Yozza Hughes, yeah.
I can't remember the name. That's it, yeah. Yozza. What's it? Our Wiedersehen Pet, and then obviously the later Adios Pet. Which did that actually become a thing, or did I imagine that?
No, there was a sequel set in Spain. I don't think it was called Adios Pet.
I don't think it was called Adios Pet.
I don't think it was called Adios Pet.
Probably should have been, really.
I can't remember what it was called, actually.
Well, it wouldn't be called Our Wiedersehen Pet in brackets Spain, would it? No, it just wouldn't make sense.
I don't know. I can't remember. There was a sequel in Spain.
They went from country to country. There was Arrivederci Pet. There was Dos Vidania Pet. The Russians. The time when they went to Russia. Sayonara Pet. Yeah, there was loads of them. Yeah. They went around the world just petting. Just generally petting everyone.
Wherever he went, though, Love didn't live there.
No, obviously not. And they wore crocodile shoes,
Tears for Fears released the excellent Everybody Wants to Rule the World, or didn't release it, but it was in the charts anyway. And Everyone Wants to Rule the World is an ace song. I love that song. Great song.
Tears for Fears are actually a really great 80s band.
They are hugely underrated, I think. So,
yeah, well, I think it's one of those bands that in the 80s, because there's so much rubbish released in the 80s that a lot of the really great bands that are really good just become kind of mediocre because there's so much rubbish out there. Or not rubbish, average. So the 80s is full of average stuff. Heaven 17 are an average band. No, they are because they had one great hit, which is Well, yeah, but that's what I mean. But there's a lot of that kind of thing now. They in terms of their reverie and in terms of their place, there was loads of bands and stuff and single artists and duos and just think of the
ABC.
Yeah, but just think of that. Just take Depeche Mode as your top of that flowchart, and then just go to Vince Neil and then every single Vince Neil sort of sub band that he was involved with, of which is quite a number of duos, Yazoo and and a number of others, Jimmy Somerville and people like that, and just take that to that logical extreme. There's so much of that in the 80s that it became kind of when certain bands came along that did stand out, like Tears for Fears, they were kind of their message and their sound was kind of lost in that whole sea of bands. And I think there's a lot to be said for them. I revisited a lot of it recently, because of another podcast that I listened to, and I have to say there was some really interesting stuff in there. It's rubbish as well, but Everybody Wants to Rule the World, and there's a number of songs that are very good by them, and it was a great song. Was it number one? I can't remember if it was number one or it probably was.
No, because. Well, it might have been in June. I haven't got to June, but Paul Hardcastle was for pretty much all of May.
Was, yeah, because he was
in the UK anyway.
It was the time of the Akai 9000 sampler.
I think the thing is with the Paul Hardcastle thing, the link to that sort of thing is that sample, that synth stuff and things like that sort of thing is quite linked to when we do our discussion probably around music and the C64. We'll probably talk about that a lot more then, and so we'll leave that for now and. We will be discussing these things on a later date when we talk about the music of the C64, and in probably a way that just doesn't go the chip's ace.
But the thing is, it's more British artists flying the synth flag for Britain at that time when the main synth flags had been raised in Germany with Kraftwerk. Britain really leapt upon that, because we're a country of people in sheds who like to tinker with stuff. And Tears for Fears and a million other bands came about because of that, and some good, some bad, but mostly good in terms of this sort of stuff. So it'd be great when we look at that. It'd be amazing to see that lineage.
Yeah. The other one that stood out to me when I'm looking through the songs in this month sort of thing, is I know it's a personal favourite of yours, was Billy Ocean and Suddenly.
I'm thinking it's the Suddenly.
Yeah, that's the one.
I think it's that track, right? But as soon as somebody says Billy Ocean to me, I just think when the going gets tough, that's it. No, and the follow-on song from that, which was, we're still tough and we're still going, and and other things can happen.
What was the one he did for? Was it Romancing the Stone and Jewel in the Nile?
Romancing the Stone. That was when the going gets tough. The tough get going. Yeah,
and then obviously he did Suddenly, which just showed his softer, more passionate side. I'm not a big Billy Ocean.
The calm part of the
Billy Ocean, Caribbean Queen.
Yeah, people dig it, and I get it. It's great songwriting, it's great production, There's no doubt about that. The guy is an amazing talent. He
You
is.
love it.
I feel like I'm a judge on the
You
X
love
Factor.
it.
But yeah, I do like Billy Ocean stuff. I just, you know what? It's just like I said, in a sea of 80s stuff, it's more noise. It's not obtuse. It's not horrible. It's not what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
It's not Renee and Renata. It's not one hit wonder crap. It's just more stuff out there when there's so much good stuff going on.
Did he do another song for Jewel in the Nile?
He did. There was a follow-up song from the Go and Get Tough, but for the life of me, it's the name of it's gone up. But there was a follow-up song in the sequel. There was a sequel.
Jewel in the Nile. Yeah. No, yeah, because Romance in the Stone was the first, and Jewel in the Nile was.
Yeah, and that's the Go and Get Tough, and then there was a follow-on, and he did the follow-up song, which would make sense because every blockbuster movie had to have a song attached, right? At that time, it was the 80s thing. You know, Flashdance is a perfect example of a film that's about nothing, which has a great soundtrack, and way of shoring up your sales.
But speaking of movies that don't have songs attached to them, the two that stood out to me that were released this month at the cinema in the UK were John Carpenter's Starman.
Not John Carpenter's greatest moment.
It's
not
terrible.
Though.
You know, it's okay. It's all right. You know, Jeff Bridges, it's got some weirdness. It's okay.
Well, what it always proves to me, and it's not my favourite John Carpenter movie.
No.
Because obviously John Carpenter has an incredible pedigree of many movies. What it proved to me is that John Carpenter is a capable director in more than just horror genres. No, because he did The Fog and because he did Halloween and and a number of other things, horror movies. Directors can be typecast as the king of horror or the horror guy. And there's a lot of 80s directors that did that. But it's easy to forget that Escape from New York is a sci-fi movie at the end of the day, and Starman is a sci-fi movie, and there's a number of movies will allied the one he did on Mars, The Ghost of Mars, and the later rubbish. We won't talk about that. But when he was in his 70s, 80s, early 80s heyday, with things like The Thing and stuff, he was a talent to be reckoned with, and he could almost turn his hand to anything. And Starman is proof of that, because it's actually a pretty good movie. It's not what you'd expect from, but this is a guy that made Elvis.
That's
movie,
what I was
right?
going to say. Yeah.
The guy can really shift. The guy can shift gear and do different stuff. And I sometimes wonder if the studios challenged him at certain points to say, right, well, we'll let you direct this movie over here, but you need to prove that you can do this stuff. And so Starman is a proof of concept really for him. But it's all right. Yeah. Certainly, more, Witness is an interesting one.
Yeah, Witness was also released this month as well. Witness, Peter Weir, if I remember rightly, was obviously Harrison Ford. Amish kid witnesses murder. Harrison Ford has to protect Amish child in an Amish community. In the process, they build a barn. That's pretty much what I remember about it.
I remember two things about this movie. I remember it had an awful Maurice Jarre soundtrack, and I had a friend who was obsessed with Harrison Ford, who really liked it a lot.
Yes.
But then again, Harrison Ford could have walked onto the set of a movie, pulled his trousers down, and taken a dump. And my friend at that time would have happily applauded and loved it.
Yes.
Suffice to say that Witness is a capable movie, but Peter Weir movies are generally weird. Peter Weird,
yeah.
And they are a bit weird. Picnic at Hanging Rock weird.
Yeah.
So there's elements of this film that are really jarring and weird. And if you like the idea of watching Amish people have difficulty with things, but in the end erect a barn with amiable skill, then this is the movie for you. And Harrison Ford he was a carpenter, wasn't he, by trade?
Yes.
So he was a trained carpenter.
Was, yes.
In fact, he was a carpenter and making the sets in the film lot when George Lucas spotted him and said, you'd make a great character in my movie. Come see me in my trailer.
You've made that sound fast.
Make sure you've got loose.
You've made that sound fast seedier than I imagine it happened.
Make sure you've got loose trousers.
We in no way are stating that George Lucas did anything to Harrison Ford to get him the parts.
No, not in the slightest.
To get the parts hand solo.
Yeah, that's how he got his name. But that is a separate story. That's a separate legal claim, and that's nothing we want to get involved with. Suffice that, Witness is okay, but it's 80s is full of great movies, really big, character-driven, crazy movies. Commando, Predator, Rocky movies, and so these movies are kind of, they get released, but they're never going to be as big as those, which is always the thing. So Witness has got its place, but, compare it to the other movies that are around in 1982 and 83. You've still got the legacy of E.T. and
Well, don't forget that those were the entire year, though. This is just 1 month.
Yeah, and that's fair. And there'll be more that comes up. So,
1985 sort of thing. There's other bits and bobs that'll come out.
Don't go see anything in May.
No.
Avoid the cinemas in May.
But I think the other thing with this sort of thing is that Witness, was essentially, as you alluded to, is just the power of the... Back then in the 80s, was the power of the single star. Your Schwarzeneggers, your Stallones, your Harrison Fords, your people like that sort of thing who would draw in, who were worth the box office because it was like people went to see them. So, and then following that, you have people like Tom Cruise and things like that. So this was really a period sort of thing where these actors would draw in a crowd because, like you said, our joint friend sort of thing loved films with Harrison Ford no matter what they were. He didn't care. Yeah,
absolutely. And then there was an air of religious curiosity about things. Nobody really knew much about. I mean, I certainly didn't know anything about the Amish community until that movie came along.
No, didn't want to.
So this idea that they threw away technology and all the things that movie suggests that Amish. I mean, between that and the Bill Murray bowling movie, whatever it's called, I can't remember the name.
Kingpin.
But between those two, Kingpin, they're the only two Amish benchmarks I have. So they either Bill Barnes or they're crazily inept bowlers. I'm pretty sure that there's a whole slew of in between.
Something in the middle, maybe.
Yeah, well, and later down the line, of course. I mean, you take this stuff to its, TV-based conclusion, and there's these Amish dating shows and fish out of water type programs on MTV and stuff. Like exploitation gone horribly wrong. But this wasn't an exploitation movie. It was just set in a community of kind people that where something horrible happened, and there was, but it did pique that curiosity that there was a community of non-technologists, for want of a better description, that exists out there in the world, and that's how they live, and they choose to live that way. And it's like with many things back in '85. It's easy to. In this modern world we live in with internet and Google and YouTube and all these examples of culture that are thrown in every possible direction, your experience of culture back in 1985 was what was on TV and what was in the movies or in magazines. That was your exposure. There was no internet to research this stuff on. So when you were presented with something different like an Amish community in a movie, that was your understanding of Amish. You're like, wow, so that's what Amish people do and are, and it's crazy, but it's mad to think of it that way. But in a historical context, and taking out the modern methodologies that you have to look into these things quickly, that your understanding of things was formulated by that. Which is why I understand most of the Second World War because of Bugs Bunny movies. That's a whole separate podcast, and that is actually a whole separate issue I need to take up with my psychologist. Let's move on from there, though.
I think we should. There was nothing of note on TV. Aside from it was taken over, everything that I could see was just mentioned that there was the 40th anniversary VE Day celebrations, and not to play down the VE Day celebrations. VD Day celebrations would be something very different. VE Day celebrations, not to play them down, but they just included a lot of Doris Day. Probably singing White Cliffs of Dover and all things like that. I don't really remember them.
Well, in all fairness, it wouldn't be Doris Day singing that. That would be
Vera Lynn.
Vera Lynn.
I don't see what
she might have sung it.
You see what I'm like? This is of no interest to me. I'm like, there you go.
No, it's very important that we remember things like VE Day.
Oh no,
no disrespect to anybody, but I agree
I'm not knocking
with you.
them. They're just.
It was the 40th anniversary, and then 10 years later we did the 50th, and 10 years later we did the 60th.
I was 13,
and it was the usual thing.
So it didn't really impinge on me.
Yeah, and it was lots of very clean military vehicles driving around with soldiers sort of saluting and incredible stories of valor and all that sort of stuff. No problem. But TV had started to embrace its place in the national celebratory thing. And later, as we'll discover down the line, when it comes to, because we'd already had this with the Royal Wedding back in 1983, 82, sorry.
81, I think, wasn't it? 82.
81, whenever, but obviously TV had started to, even back as far back as the Queen's coronation, TV had started to centralise its place as the place, if you can't be at the event, you can celebrate it vicariously with TV. That's something that comes back, and of course Live Aid happens. which is a natural progression of that, but that's obviously interesting and a separate thing.
And probably will come up next couple of months, I think. It was
I would imagine, yes. It's in July, I think, of the same year, so yeah.
So there you go. So that's the media in 85. It's all right.
It was bad.
There were some songs, and there's a couple of films released.
Yeah.
Not much to do. Go to the cinema, watch The Irish.
Just, A View to a Kill.
Yeah, hum that. There you go. So that's our media. Let's move on then to part 3, the ugly games. We've had the good.
Okay, the final here.
Yeah. So let's crack on and see what we come to. And these are the games that even Zapped thought were terrible for the time. So God knows what.
Yeah, it's not going to take long with these.
No, it's not, because the first one we're going to look at is the Dark Tower. Dark Tower. Awful Jet Set Willy ripoff. Essentially, just bad controls, bad visuals, bad sound, bad.
Yeah, any game where you're playing an egg with legs, never going to have that much longevity for me.
Just bad.
And again, the thing is, the game was explained like we had it previously. The game, you've got X amount of time, X amount of levels, you've got to do this stuff. But the game was essentially Manic Miner / Mission Impossible / every other platform, the game of that type, with a really jaunty circus-like soundtrack, which Zap loved, but I didn't think was that great.
No, it was not.
And essentially, there was some guy had said, imagine if you were an egg, but he's a prince turned into an egg, but you've got legs, and you can. Some guy had that conversation, and some executive went, "Yeah, that's great. Yeah, make that a game." And we'll call it Dark Tower because of no reason whatsoever.
I couldn't figure out. Dark Tower does not conjure up jaunty eggs.
No, because it kind of felt playful and funny. So it felt more like a kind of circusy, funny kind of adventure game.
Why Dark Tower?
It didn't. Yeah, exactly. The Dark Tower. If it had been called, the Tower of Silly, or the Egg Tower, even, it just involved eggs in it because there was a lot of egg in it.
Yeah.
But no, I've played a million games like it before this, during this phase, and afterwards. This one didn't stick out in any way other than it was particularly jarring with its music, and it felt like the game had a lot of attention paid to detail for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah. Not very good.
Just plain weird. It was just weird.
Badly conceived. Next up, Penetrator. Great name.
Speaking of games that are just plain weird, this was Scramble, right?
It's a Scramble clone, yeah.
With really blocky, sort of weird graphics that were kind of... It reminded me of... later down the line, as we come to them, we'll look at the Thalamus games, and there's a couple of those. Sanction is a game like that, and Sanction has that kind of similar blocky graphic, but smooth kind of feel. Where they've gone kind of, it's the colorization, I think, and the way they've chosen the colors and the sprites and everything else. My take was for it that it was just annoying, and actually the in-game music drove me borderline insane because it was so annoying. And easy. It's easy. I couldn't be killed by anything. I just flew through most of that level by not doing much. So.
Yeah, it was very easy. I've actually thought the music was okay. I didn't actually mind the music.
Yeah, it's okay,
right, but it's a decent enough Scramble clone. It was just I just wanted to look at it because I couldn't understand why it was called Penetrator. I was like, it's a strange,
well, you were
strange title. I mean, yeah, okay.
Well, you were penetrating
the
like,
caves,
caves and things. And what is it with these game designers in the mid-80s and caves? It's like, just stop putting games in caves. There's so many games in caves. It's bizarre. We're going to come across this, and just off the top of my head, and even in this podcast, we've come across several games in caves. We're going to come across more games in caves. Even really great games like Sacred Armor of Antiria are based in caves. There's so many games in caves. It's
I'm going to guess it. I'm going to guess it's because it just allows them to have a black background.
Well, yeah, and let's be fair, there are shoot 'em ups that have caves in them, R-Type and a number of others, and we'll come across all of them. However, this was not a great version of Scramble, partly because you could pretty much walk through the levels, apart from when you get to the inevitable navigate the bizarre blocky landscape part, which was always the same in Scramble. But I remember playing Scramble on a Commodore PET, and it was better than this.
Yeah, it's Scramble in it. Yeah, it is what it is. But
you don't shoot. You can't just spew bombs. You can't spew the bombs like you can in this. Bombs have to sort of
and they have to arc.
emit, and they have to arc and take time to drop. That's the pain of Scramble.
Yeah.
That's and those are the decisions you have to make. Do I drop down and shoot these things from a low angle, or do I go up and try and bomb? As much as that's a very simple game logic, that's Scramble. This take it all the way. You just kind of avoid the rocks. Not a great. It's not a great game penetrator. No, and were you penetrating? I don't know. They could have just got it scrambly for me. It's very similar.
Yeah, it's not great.
I play better Scramble games now.
Yeah. Shades. I've just put shit more like. That's my note.
Yeah. My note with Shades was, how slowly can you walk into horrific danger? Turns out, really slowly.
I couldn't attack. What was? It's some flick screen thing which ran when you walk off one side of a screen. You could end up in the middle of the woods. You could end up in the middle of a bridge. You could end up in the middle of some building, and there was no continuity to anything. And there was just enemies that would come towards you. I didn't know how to fight. Awful. One of the worst things I've played. And I've played a lot, but that was dreadful. So yeah, didn't like it. No, shit. Just awful.
It felt to me like someone had described Saberwolf to somebody.
Yeah.
And said, make this. And they was like, okay. And then they'd made it, but they were like, right, this slight problem here is that everything is really slow. So as long as you can put up with the slow, because in the game, you're like, as soon as you start, you're like, walk slowly to the right. And look, there's a monster there. Fight him slowly.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my, this is so drawn out and boring. So, and it felt like there was no, the danger was so slow, and there was no ability to maneuver it or get around it. It just, had some. The graphics, clearly there was a lot of graphics, and there was a lot of drawing and a lot of thought gone into that part. No, I'm not saying it's great, but there was clearly someone had made a game world and thought, right, we're going to build this out. But if navigating it, and there's a game, in a very different genre, but Karateka, which we'll come to later, falls into the same problem. It's just so slow it becomes pointless. And this game was exactly the same. No, if you're moving around, because the whole point of Attic Attack and Saberwolf and all those Ultimate games and Jetpack and all of those is that those games have a pace. They're frantic pace. They are. And if you don't have that in a game of this type, then you may as well forget what you're doing, because you are going to be compared to a game of that type. So this is like a really crap version of Saberwolf. And that's exactly what it is.
This was done, the better version of this that comes a fair bit later sort of thing is Robin of the Wood.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And
Robin of the Wood moves fast, pacey, and is really good.
Exactly. You've got to have pace in these games. I don't know why the animations are so slow. The Commodore 64 is capable of doing much faster graphics. My only conclusion was that they thought, you know what? If you're going to walk towards danger, you're going to take your time over that. But it just kills the mojo for me. Yeah, and what does it mean by shades? What does it mean?
No one knows. That's a toilet roll make by Asda.
Exactly. Well, it may as well be.
So, yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, actually, it is what it is.
What it is, yeah.
This particular game, I don't know. I didn't get it.
No.
And, and later down the line, when it comes to exploratory adventures and stuff, there's, even, as much as the graphics are more perfunctory, even some of the, dare I say it, the Sega Mega Drive adventure games of this type where you go into buildings and search for stuff and move around and navigate landscapes, those RPG type games, which this is kind of, are better because they're simple, whereas this is, I think it tried to over egg the pudding. I'm not sure what eggs they use, really massive heavy
egg
ones.
from the Dark Tower, probably.
But anyway, yeah, exactly. So these are heavy eggs and not good eggs. So Shades is definitely Shades. Close those shades and move to curtains for me.
Stop with these.
It's curtains for those shades.
Let's draw on.
Hey.
Web dimension. Web dimension, which I thought was going to be when it first started. Web dimension. I thought, okay, Tempest. So this is some weird version of Tempest. Except it's not. It's just some really, really rubbish, incomprehensible music thing.
Yeah.
I can't. There's a web, You move around this web in a sort of pseudo 3D web. There's these things moving on the web that highlight certain parts of it. If you move into them, you die. If you hold down the fire button, you become a series of musical notes that gets louder. I don't know why. I don't know to what end. At one point, I did manage to kill one of the things. I don't know how, because I couldn't repeat it. And garbage. Just what?
So, yeah, you're right.
Did you understand it?
First thing to note, no, I didn't. And first thing to note, this was an Activision game.
It was an Activision game, yes.
So when that logo came up, I thought, okay, if Activision have, lent their weight to this, but then I had to remember, this is 1985 Activision. So, and if someone turned up with a pencil and said, you know what, I'm going to animate this into a game, they'd go, yes, do it. So some guy, person, woman, maybe, I don't know, turned up and said, I've created this game, it's based on some kind of spider web-ish thing. It's kind of oral, sound-based game. You've got to do this stuff. Yeah, that sounds great. Do it. Just make it. We'll release it. Okay. And that's, I think, as far as their QA process got, because this game is inexplicable. I could not.
Yep.
I mean, my notes are, what the actual hell is this game about? I started the game. I'm in a web. I thought to myself, maybe it's one of those games where you have to, draw around the compartment shapes and then it fills them in. A bit like there's many games where you can do that. You know what the type I mean, where the idea of the game
kicks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you've got to fill in portions of the web. No. So then when I went near something and pressed the fire button, it emitted this arguably really nice sound. The sound in the game is really good. There's somebody was clearly a sound designer who really liked the idea of being able to mix and sound and blend sounds. The sounds are amazing. Unfortunately, everything else makes no sense whatsoever. And I just found myself wandering around a funnel-based web, not sure what I'm doing, pressing fire occasionally and emitting this sound, sometimes dying, sometimes not, but not really progressing anywhere. And I was like, so I didn't get it. I don't know what the dimensions of the web were about. And it's sometimes hard because these games are somewhat decontextualized. So we're replaying them many years later. But I would argue that if you said to somebody, right, make this game now using an Xbox S or one of the new consoles, the PlayStation 5 game, I want you to make a game where you've got a web and you describe the complexity of web dimension to them and they made it. It would still make no sense whatsoever. It would, even with the greatest sound in the world, it would make no sense. So for me, nice sounds, goodness knows what you're supposed to do. And I think Zapped also picked up on the same vibe. They were like, this game has an idea, but it never makes it to anything other than an idea. And how Activision gave that the green light, I don't know. But we're in the same world where Melbourne House would literally release a game about a hamster if someone said, "I've made a game about a hamster." So these are strange times for some of those software
Melbourne
houses.
House released Dark Tower.
Exactly. Need we say more?
No, we don't. Let's move on to our final game of this show. And it's Buck Rogers. I can't remember the full title. What's the full title? Something Dimension, something with a Buck Rogers.
Yeah, it is in fact Buck Rogers. And I'm not sure of the rest because I don't have it written down.
I just put Buck Rogers.
It's Buck Rogers in the adventures in the domain of the inept. Probably. It may as well be.
Slow and dull, very, very dull version of the arcade games. This is another arcade conversion. From the original was 1982, so I think this came out quite a bit earlier than 1985, actually, to give it its due. I think it's 83.
Yeah, it did.
I think Zapped were just probably, either it had just been released over here, and Zapped were picking it up, or they were just filling up space in issue 1. So it's quite possible that's what it was. We just picked it up because it was in there. The only thing I can say about this sort of thing, I mean, I went and looked, I played through the Commodore, I played through the C64 version. I got through the first wave-based thing, so you go through basically what it is, it's a into the screen flying thing and things are coming at you go across this landscape. So the first thing you got to do is go through these, essentially like slalom skiing through these poles. So you get through these poles, you do enough of them, you move on to the next section where these UFOs come flying towards you from behind you, shoot enough of them, you move on to the next section where these things come bouncing towards you, you shoot enough of them, you go into space. UFOs come at you again, you shoot it for them, and then you get the boss, which is some big ship. You shoot that, repeat. Except you've got a time limit, which is ticking down all the time, so you have to do this quite quickly. The problem is, once you get to level 2, you can't actually get to the end of the level without the time ticking down. I couldn't. It doesn't move fast enough for you to actually accomplish what you need to do. And if you do manage, and without losing some life, so every time time runs out, you lose a life. You can manage to make it to the end of season 2. I got to wave 3. Wave 3 moves even faster. So by this time, you just run out of lives. And it's just it's just dull and boring. The visuals are really bland. They've got this horrible color schemes going on, really garish. And I went and looked at the arcade game just as a comparison. The arcade game is really fast and bright and in your face and really cool. And it's essentially, 1982. This is early Space Harrier.
Yes,
this is Sega's
so.
Inaugural attempts at making a Space Harrier game. But it's more like, I don't know, Space Cortina on the C64. There's no Harrier about this. It's just space biplane. It's not very good. And Zapped were right to pull it apart. And I think it's of its time. It's 83, it's a bit earlier, but it's a step too far for I think what the C64 could actually do.
Well, I think you're right. I think the truth of the matter is this game was made earlier, which means it was really launched probably around the time that Atari 2600 games were passable. So the idea of supermassive blocky sprites wasn't too obtuse. And so the idea of flying across what is just essentially stripy landscape and shooting stuff and flying between the sort of slalom posts a la a ski game. Okay, that's the arcade, and it was an arcade conversion, at a time when that was the kind of, like we said in the episode 0, many arcade conversions occurred that shouldn't have been, because they were a license, and Buck Rogers in 1980s was at least popular, or certainly heard of in the UK. By 1985, maybe less so, but it was still back in 1980, Buck Rogers. In 1981 in the UK 82 was a big TV show at the time. So there was a legacy of, that kind of, Jill Gerard and Boogie 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 and all that kind of stuff. The arcade game was an extension of that. You were flying what was, quite exciting spaceships and stuff like that in the arcade. It was inevitable that a Commodore 64 version, because there was a belief originally that you could just replicate games on the Commodore 64 that were in the arcade. Eliding the fact that the hardware was completely bespoke in an arcade of that type, and that and it was a completely different way of making games and programming them. So the Commodore 64 did an approximation, and that approximation is this, and it is reviewed several years later, and as much as it has arcade inspired sounds, and it's just horrific to look at and unplayable. And my original experience of this game was a turbo tape loader, which it was a tape that had an inexplicable amount of games on it. It must have been like 70 games on this one C90, 45 minutes, hundreds of games. And this was one of them. And I remember loading it up in what felt like seconds with a turbo tape. And because of that, it had the immediacy of the arcade, and you could persevere with it for so long. You were never going to get very far, as you say. The game logic was so crazy that it was impossible. It was one of those, for me, it was one of those games, you loaded it up, you played it for 2 seconds, you were like, and then you would move on to something that had a bit more tangible skill involved. But it never endeared me to the Commodore 64, games of this type. In fact, just like the Formula 1 game that we played earlier, it suffers from the same problem. This is an arcade conversion that isn't very good, and it suffers because of that. And there's a number of them on the 64 that do that. There's a number. In fact, I can, off the top of my head, I can think of Kung Fu Masters, another one which features garish, horrific sprites. Exactly, and we'll come to this. And there's a number of, games that, I admire the idea of the conversion, but the reality was never going to be any good, because they weren't trying to play the Commodore 64 to its strengths. They were trying to emulate an arcade, and that's a very different programming and a very different skill to have. And if they'd have made a Buck Rogers game, but made it specifically to play on the strengths of the Commodore 64, it would have been a wholly different experience, I think. And what you end up with is another pole position, which is just a big block of sprites moving left or right and avoiding stuff. Well, that game's been done a million times over.
It's just not very good. The arcade game's not brilliant, but it had a snappiness to it. And that snappiness was sadly very, very lost in the 64 version.
Exactly, and as if Buck Rogers was not just about flying spaceships. That was a character who interacted with other characters. Later down the line, when we come to it, 1986, I think it will be, there's Dan Dare and his games about characters who were sci-fi characters in sci-fi character worlds. The idea of doing a Buck Rogers game where you're just flying a spaceship is kind of stupid, really, if you think about it. Outside of an arcade where you've got 10 pence or 20 pence or whatever it was in America, a quarter or whatever, that quarter's worth of time buys you a bit of Buck Rogers experience. Outside of that, this has no place in a home arcade conversion. No, because it was so poor, and it doesn't vary either, which is it's a huge problem. And like you say, later down the line, we get to Space Harrier, which is not, again, a very successful conversion for the Commodore 64. No. We'll come to that.
Yeah, the arcade game probably doesn't meander too much from what it does, sort of thing. But you stick 10p in, you have a couple of minutes of fun, and you move on. You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't spend this and go, I bought this game and I'm now stuck with it.
Yeah, I think if you took what was this game, probably let's say £8. Let's say it was £8 on average. So divide that up by the amount of 10p's. And go and spend £8 for the 10p's on the Buck Rogers arcade. I bet you'd have as much fun, and you wouldn't feel that pressure of owning it and having to reload it.
Okay, and that's it. That's our games. That's the games we're going to cover.
That's it. Done.
So we did think about, and we probably are going to, sort of thing, recommendations. Maybe put some kind of list together of games that we think are still worth going back and having a look at. Do you have any you think you want to put on there?
Yeah, I think for me, out of all of those, and let's face it, this isn't a classically great list.
No, it's not.
I'm going to put 2 games out of our list. I'm going to place Cauldron, and I'm going to put Shadowfire.
Okay.
I like Shadowfire, but it was a game that you need to really invest yourself into. That's not for me, but that doesn't mean it's not good. And Cauldron is a game that has a really good game world and game logic of its own, and it is hard, but you've got to persevere a little bit sometimes with these early 80s games, because if you don't, you just write them all off. So those 2 for me, Cauldron and Shadowfire.
Okay, I would agree on both of those. I would probably stick Pastfinder in there as well. Pastfinder, I think, is unusual enough to be worth a look. I think it's not very... like I said, I never played it at the time. I don't think it's got that much of a reputation. It's not something I heard talked about very much. But I think it's an unusual, offering the player quite a lot of choice, and it's quite unusual to play. And like I said, it's quite influential on some of the bigger games that would come out on the C64 later on, especially by Braybrook. And I think it is worth a look. So yeah, I think I agree with the other 2. I think Shadowfire, definitely worth a look. It looks and sounds great, just whether you get on with the way it plays. And certainly Cauldron, because just rock hard, but if you can master it, I think it's a fun game. So yeah,
absolutely.
So, yeah,
okay.
That's our recommendation. So even from the dross, here you go. Games, we've picked some. Most weren't very good this month. Hopefully things will pick up. Who knows?
It does, though. This is the beauty of this podcast, is that we know that the games all ramp up, and we haven't even got to.
That's true.
Any of the Sensible games. We haven't got to any of the Lucasfilm games. We haven't got to any of the Cinemaware games. There's so many amazing things to come up. It's issue 1, and but there's so many great issues to come, and so many amazing things to happen there. It's going to be. There's some really cool things in there.
That is true. It is.
Don't judge it by this year.
No, don't judge it by this month. We'll get better. But hopefully, to be fair, it's always nicer to talk probably about the worst games. You can say more about them. It's hard to say, yeah, this is really good. So, we'll see how it goes. Just going to round up. So we're going to round off, with Crapverts. Now, in between, obviously, the coverage we did last in episode 0, which covered a big slew of time from 82 to 84, 85. Adverts did get better, but that isn't to say that they all got good. So there are some decent adverts, and we were picking some out. A couple that sprang out to me. I don't know if you have looked through these. So the first one I want to pick out is the Shadowfire advert. If you want to have a look at that. So Shadowfire advert sort of thing, so there's a picture of the box, and there's the logo underneath it and beyond software. The thing. The problem is though, the box is on fire, and they basically put some kind of fire effect across the whole thing, which makes it almost illegible. Yeah. So this is, you're like, what is this? I can't. Oh no! Did you just move on? So not a great. I get it. Shadow. There's a shadow on it, and there's a fire on it. There's this is taking things quite literally. However, there's literal and then there's going a bit too far, and I think this has probably gone a bit too far. I think because it almost makes you. I can't even read what this is.
Well, it says on there, we've created an adventure and removed the text when they blatantly haven't removed the text. So
really, I can't remember much text.
Well, you've got to have some writing on it, right? There's some descriptive stuff, but
it's all icon driven, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but well, maybe that's what they've done. I mean, they're kind of proud of that. They're bragging about that on there, but
yeah. Right.
It catches the eye though, right? I think it's like, oh wow, that game's on fire. That must mean it's really great.
Yeah, I guess, and I think my thought is they put a shadow on it and it's on fire. They've literally done it literally. Someone has just said, "Oh, what's this game called? Shadowfire." Right? Okay, just cover it with a shadow and put it on fire.
Well, what makes me laugh is the top text. If we've text on there says we've created an adventure. We've removed the text, and then in case you didn't understand what that meant, the text underneath really clearly explains we've created icons.
Yeah.
So it's just in case that you don't get our inference. No, this is graphics.
And that text looks really badly. So it's placed really badly with bad boxes around it. That white text. Yeah. It's not great. Yeah. It's like someone forgot to remove the box.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happened there. Someone's added. I think someone from the magazine even might have added that on it because it.
Maybe.
I genuinely think they've been presented with the advert, and they've gone, look, that's great, but where do you get it from? What does it mean? What's it about? And they've gone, oh no, you're right. Put some white text on it in a block
to try and explain what it is.
It does look really out of place. It honestly looks like Word comments. It's like someone's commented on that in Word, so not great.
The next one I want to look at is, if I'm going to try and describe this sort of thing. Actually, you probably is we covered the game Shades, and now we've got the advert for it. So this is some kind of abstract design that bears no relation to the game. This is someone's gone mad with clip art that I can only make out. There's like it's mostly a white background. So I'll try and describe this sort of thing. It's a white background with some sort of isometric view of a sort of landscape with pointy, fir trees, and in the background, well, crawling over one edge of it, there's a clawed hand. There's a silhouette of a person. There's some clip art shapes in the background, and in the top of this, there's a blue ball. There's a square with an eye in it, and at the top it says S symbol, H symbol. It's a shade, but it's just these weird symbols. It's got nothing to do with the game.
No.
I mean, absolutely nothing.
Aside from the fact that your description just then sounded like you'd eaten mushrooms. You're exactly right. Now, this is a Commodore 64 advert designed by Salvador Dali at best. So this is
it's more like his Mexican non-union counterpart.
Salvio Dala. Salvio Dala, create me an advert, and then here it is. It doesn't make any sense. You're right. I'm not sure what it means, why, and how that relates to a fully animated 3D adventure for 1 to 4 players extending over 64 colourful locations. Requires a joystick shouting. I don't get it. And then there's like a film roll, negative film roll underneath with really tiny screens that you kind of barely see. And I didn't realise this game was Durell. Well, of course, Durell have got there's an interesting tale to tell about Durell software, of course, because they were the creators of Saboteur, which was an amazingly big and popular game on the Sinclair Spectrum, Commodore 64 version. But so this is a Durell game, and they had a history of creating really, really weird games.
Did Durell
Thanatos was a Durell game.
Didn't Jarell do the conversion of View to a Kill?
Yes, they did.
And that was god awful.
Yeah, so they had some odd licenses, they had some odd titles, and this one is no exception. And that artwork, such as you could call it artwork, it's abstract beyond belief. It means nothing. And your description, the only thing that missed out was the random eye, the isometric eye that's slightly below the giant drop-shadowed globe.
Yeah, no.
Connected via lines to... it's just weird. It's all weird. And it doesn't actually mean anything in relation to that game. That game is nothing like that. Nothing.
No.
So, classic 1985 game advert where the advert literally relates in no way to the actual game itself in any capacity. And that's why we do these Crapverts, though.
Yeah, what kind of art packages were around then? Because it just seems like someone's just stuck every kind of thing they've got in the clip out option.
Do you know, I was thinking the exact same thing. What did they use to create that? And I'm thinking that it must have been 1985. You're very limited in what software was around at the time in terms of typesetting and graphics.
PageMaker or something? I don't know if was it PageMaker? Could
have been PageMaker. It might have even predated that and been something like Ready, Set, Go. I don't know.
It's garbage, whatever it is.
Know. Yeah, it might even have been, dare I say it, drawn by hand, which would make sense if someone had no control over their hand.
It is a frightening thought.
Yeah, like that movie where the hand comes to life and just does stuff. That's
the hand.
The hand. Yeah, in this version of the hand, it came to life and created that and made a game out of it. So,
that'd be brilliant. The hand makes crap Commodore 64 games. You will be terrified.
Yes. So, not a great advert for that game. In fact, not a great advert at all. But it's arguably a little bit more interesting than just a game on fire.
Yeah, true. We've talked about it, I think, more than it really deserves to be talked about because the game's awful. Actually, that advert is more interesting than the game. That's true. Right. What's next? There's a few I could choose from here. I'm gonna. There's not much to say about this, but the full page advert for Minder.
Again, some kind of weird licensing. Minder was a very popular TV show in the UK. I think what we have to set the tone for here is the popularity of Minder. Which, if you actually described that show but didn't say the title to somebody, they'd be like, what? Take this into the modern world and say, right, Netflix are going to make a show about a guy that sells cars who's looked after by his mate, which is essentially the entire plot of Minder.
Yeah.
No, he's looked after by a kind of guy who can handle himself.
Yeah, an Xboxer.
He's weak. An Xboxer looks after a car salesman who gets into mischief. There's nothing about it yet. In the 80s, along with a million other shows of this type, I think it was something to do with the colloquial localization of things. So when TV shows of this type were set in a place with a certain type of character, so the idea of Minder, the idea of Del Trotter, and those kind of TV shows, and Alvida Zane Pet, where there's I think there is some kind of British colloquial humour that these programs seem to land and hit. There's one with there's numerous types of this show around. Now, how they made that into a game?
That's what I was just thinking. If you think that the description of what you just said, Xboxer looks after mate who sells cars. How's that a game? In what way does this lend itself for someone to go, you know what, mine is quite big, make a game out of it?
Well, what worries me most of all is that at some point an artist was confronted with the idea of making those two characters from that game into an 8-bit playable animated character. And so, what was his name? Was it Terry Nutkins? Was that his name in that, or am I getting that mixed up with somebody else?
No, Terry Nutkins. It's Terry. It's Arthur Daly.
Arthur Daly
and Terry
Strong, or Big Ted.
Terry Strong. It's just Terry. and then there was. I'm hoping Dave's the bartender
exactly.
was in it.
Yeah, sort
That's
him
all
out,
I'm
mate.
hoping.
So,
I never played this game, so hopefully we get a chance to.
Well, what you know is that aside from that image in the advert, which is hands and wrists in so many weird places that it almost breaks your brain looking at it. Apart from that, because this, if you look at it, it's like there's obviously Arthur Daly's got a right hand and a left hand, and Terry Nutkins Terry Strong, whatever his name actually is. He's got that Arteza there. He's got his glass and his tucked under his armpit. It's all weird. The logic and the layout of that picture are weird. So there's an 8-bit version of them somewhere. I actually might have to invest a moment at some point.
I think we owe it to ourselves.
What an 8-bit Arthur Daly sounds like. And that, by the way, is such a great title for an 8-bit album if you're a music creator. Feel free to make an 8-bit Arthur Daly. Because he did release songs. Arthur Daly, Little Dodgy Baby, and Chaz and Dave released that, didn't they? Underneath is alright. That was their hit. They had hits. In fact, what is his name? The guy who's in this? The Minder guy. What's his actual real... Anyway, he had a hit with the song from the show, right? He sang it, so...
Yeah, I Should Be So Good For You.
Yeah.
Dennis Waterman.
Dennis Waterman, but, his name wasn't Big Den or Denny the Menace.
That's his real name, Dennis Waterman.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's just Terry
Strong.
Terry something. So I can't look at this advert any longer. It's just Arthur Daly and Terry Strong looking at me, drinking something, and then DK Tronics have tried to make a game out of it.
But that's what I mean. But classic, no description of what the game is, no description of what you have to do, nothing other than licensed. It's licensed, therefore it must be good. And there's Thames logo on there just right next to it.
And it's available across a range of microcomputers.
Yeah, and who's going to buy that? No 8, 9, 10-year-old kid's going to go, Dad, can I have that Minder game because it looks so great? No, this is dad games, right? This is games for dads.
We may be missing out on a classic here. There is a chance. I don't think it will be.
I'll play it, and I'll bring some thoughts to the next podcast. I'm reasonably sure I can pretty much guess my own response, which is this game is crap. But you know what? I'm going to start there and work my way back. Let's see where let me be surprised by it.
All right. I think that's what maybe we need to do is maybe some of these games we don't know from these adverts is actually go and look at them and report back.
Well, you know what? I'm going to make a point of playing Minder. I've got a feeling there's going to be text in it. I've got this. For some reason, I've got this.
Here, tell.
Terry, go north, fight.
Right. Enough about Minder. The next one I want to talk about, just quickly, briefly. This is not a terrible advert, but there's just a part of it that does make me laugh. And this is Griffin, Tony Crowther's Quicksilver. Yes. Now this is a vaguely decent bit of art of what looks like a griffin. In a fantasy land with some foliage and a tree behind him, but it's the expression on the griffin's face as he looks up towards this black snooker ball in the sky heading towards him.
What is that?
I don't know. I thought it was a black snooker ball that's heading towards him. That really has got him quite worried. It has really sort of struck with me, and I'm quite concerned for this griffin, and that snooker ball heading for him from the sky. Because the rest of the painting's all right. The arms freak me out a little bit.
What perturbed me about this was, aside from the really, don't get me wrong, I can't draw anything, so that is pretty good in my estimation. Whether he's looking at a snooker ball and thinking, why is that not on a snooker table? That's irrelevant. What threw me was the screens on the bottom left-hand corner, what game always features the title of the game at the top, no matter what screen you're on, and is that shooting giant skulls? So and there's a city background at the bottom as well. So and that also features in the background of the image. So I'm guessing at some point the Griffin, fights in a city. It's obviously one of those shoot 'em up type games. But if those graphics are because I know that Tony Crowther's a very accomplished programmer, so that kind of piques my interest a little bit to think, okay, Tony Crowther's behind this. The guy can program. There's no doubt about that. So I'd be intrigued to look at this. But I have this horrible feeling that all my expectations are going to be dashed, like a snowball when it's thrown against a wall. And I think as much as it looks exciting and relatively enticing in those screen grabs, when they're screen sized, it's going to be some kind of blocky, horrific Griffin nightmare.
Well, I noticed that in the bottom screenshot sort of thing, the Griffin is facing front on to the camera.
Yeah,
so it's making me think, like, is this some kind of Griffin choplifter?
Oh, God, imagine that griff lifter.
Chop on.
No, yeah, and do you know what? The thing is, and there's a rule about Commodore 64 games at this time. In 1985, it changes later. But in 1985, the more sprites they want to put on there, they just make them bigger.
Yeah.
So you end up with these big balloon-looking, super expanded sprites, it was never a good mode of graphics. No, nothing in pixels is ever great if it's expanded twice its size. It just looks kind of blockier. And just looking at those in that small format makes me think that griffin is massive on the screen, and those skulls are going to be really big. Tiny little skulls like that, they look quite detailed. Okay, expand that to the full size of a TV, and you're going to end up with one or two of those and you can tell they wobble up and down. They're an up and down wobbler, and you just know that this game involves you shooting left and right, and maybe even dropping bombs downwards. There's going to be an uncomfortable moment, isn't there, when you're facing forwards, dropping bombs? It's going to look like you're dropping shit. There's no way around that.
It's going to be bad.
So, yeah, it's going to look like you're shitting on things. So you're going to shoot left and right out your mouth, but the bottom one is going to come out of this griffin's bottom. So, no. And maybe
we'll have a look at it.
We'll look at it. We should.
I'm wondering sort of thing. Some of these, I'm going to actually look to see if they actually do get covered in the magazine. If they do actually come up in the months, we'll hit them in the months they actually appear in.
Yeah. I think we probably will. And also, you notice there it says, in association with the Wizard Development Company. So my feeling is that this is a Tony Crowther thing, actually, and we'll discover this later down the line. He often works in co-productions with other developers as well. So he often is the programmer, because he, with graphics maybe not his strength. I don't know. We'll discover this as we go along. There's a load of interviews in Zapped with. I think there's one in this issue, isn't there, with Tony Crowther? Or is that
there is. Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point he's 19, I think.
He's a bit of a poster boy for British code money.
Later, of course, it became the Darlings, and there's others as well. But we'll come to all of that and the whole tale of the games that the game companies that came about, the Hewsons and others as well. There's so many amazing things to see and do.
But not what our last advert probably is like, and our last advert is the last advert put in there, which is Supergran.
Yeah.
So like Minder before it, Supergran was a TV show that for some reason was popular in the 80s, kind of similar in tone to something like Metal Mickey, which it's kind of a light-hearted. The character of Supergran was this old woman who was a bit on the sort of inventive, crazy side. I don't really remember that much about it. I think was she Scottish or Geordie?
Yeah, Scottish, I think.
A Scottish sort of thing, and I can't really remember sort of thing. So, but there's obviously
actually probably Geordie because it's Tine Tees, isn't it?
It is Tine Tees, yeah. So again, somebody's gone, that's popular, make a game of it, and so. The blurb on this, if you register this, you can get a free 16 by 24. Don't say what measurement. Full colour poster. So it could be 16 bananas by 24, but I don't know. 16 by 24 feet. Imagine a 16 by 24 feet picture of Supergran turning up at your house. Your mum's not going to be happy. But it says this great new game is based on the Tine Teen series Supergran and produced in association with Tine Teens Television. Supergran will be available for the Commodore and everything sort of thing. The Atari, and this is what I found interesting, Atari and Einstein to follow.
What is that?
What's the Einstein?
That is not a computer of that era I'm familiar with.
No, neither am I. But, they obviously...
I've heard of the others, but I've never heard of an Einstein, and they don't even...
They grouped that in with the BBC, MSX, Atari, and Einstein.
Yeah,
maybe that was just something released in...
I don't know.
Maybe it's just something released in Newcastle. I don't know.
Is that a real thing? I've never heard of the
I've
Einstein,
never heard of it.
But someone might correct us, and a Google search will probably reveal it. But my feeling is, any game that brands itself as specially written for kids tells me that it's not going to be great. There's no game images on it whatsoever. Always a bit of a and that's funny enough. That's something that prevails to this day. This is that's the cutscene in a game that's crap. And in modern parlance. No, then that happened. It doesn't happen so much now, actually, because most game footage is game engine based. But it wasn't that long ago when you saw the game adverts and you were like, "Wow, that looks like an amazing game," and then you realise that the graphics in the game advert were nothing like the game itself. And
just to say that the advert here is actually focusing just a single image is a picture of Supergran in what can only be described as some kind of weird Da Vinci-esque flying machine.
Yeah, that's in the TV show.
Yeah, she's on a bike, which has been changed into some kind of flying machine with the addition of
Yes.
what looks like a cut-up bin liner on above it. It's rubbish. It's awful. So
Yeah, she in the TV show she flies.
oh yeah,
When I say fly, she actually sort of appears on a really horrific blue screen background with
I
that,
can well
that
imagine.
wobbly kind of footage in the background. You know the type. You've
I
seen
do.
the type.
But it just begs the question, sort of thing, is that what this does show, this and Mind, and the reason that I wanted to include them, sort of thing, was it's just anything was fair game to be changed, to be
Yes.
to be made into a game at this point, sort of thing. This is 2 years after the crash in America. This is 1985, and it's like people have not learned anything from the fact of like if you produce dross, essentially something bad will happen. Luckily, we never got it as bad, sort of thing. But this is a really good example of the fact that like anything, just stick a game in it, kids will want it, and it's this will be a terrible game, and just anything that can be licensed was being licensed back then with no thought for the actual product. Probably, I wait to be Minder might be amazing, might be a lost classic. I'm betting it's not, but there you go. I think on that. I think we're done.
That's it.
Yeah.
The Crapverts are done. So I'm going to go off and play. I'm going to find Minder and play it because I desperately want to see whether I want to see an 8-bit. Now Terry Nutkins. I know that's not his name, but I don't know why. I want him to be Terry Nutkins. I don't know why, but I'm going to find out what Arthur Daly and Terry Nutkins, Tezza. What they're like. So that's my mission for the next podcast, is to look into that. And I know it's going to be. I know. And you know what? It'll be my luck. It'll be text based. I'm just going to get there and it'll be like, wow, welcome to Minder.
It's what you deserve.
Sell car.
If I'm honest.
You've sold the car. He's not happy about the engine. The engine's dodgy. Terry.
Order drink from Dave.
Set Terry on. Person that bought car.
do.
That could be so good. There'll be a horrible 8-bit version of that as well, won't there? I know it.
There will be.
This is all. It's a voyage of discovery with these 85 games. It is.
Who knows? All right. So on that note, we will be back with another episode of Zapped to the Past. We'll be looking at June 85.
Yes, the affectionately titled Episode 2.
Yeah. So listen out for that. We hope you've enjoyed this. And we will see you again soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Zapped to the Past podcast. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the world of Commodore 64 games, as well as the music, sights, sounds and news from around the 1980s, driven, of course, by the issue of Zapped 64 magazine, published at the time. We will be back next week with another podcast, so do please join us. Until then, please head over to zappedtothepast.com to sign up to our email list, as well as check out all the links and resources in the show notes. You will also find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram under Zapped to the Past. The Zapped to the Past podcast is written and produced by Adrian Mills and Graham Raddings and recorded at Flaky Bits 2.0 studio. All opinions expressed are those of the writers, and while we indeed love Zapped 64 magazine, the Zapped to the Past podcast is not affiliated with it in any way. Stay safe and see you next time.